Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos, and at the time of recording and broadcast of this episode, the United Kingdom is in a state of national mourning following the sad death at the age of 99 of His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. And therefore we're going to go straight into the episode today. However, the good news is that this episode is a harbinger of good news, because I'm going to be able to tell you with great pleasure that one of the great musical revue shows that I saw at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in 2019, I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical, which was an absolutely surefire, copper-bottomed, brilliant show, which I think will be of absolute fascination for any listener of Musical Talk, is about to be streamed between the 22nd of April and the 12th of May 2021. And that, I think, is a very exciting prospect for any listener of Musical Talk, because the great thing about this review by Alexander S. Bermange is that it absolutely appeals first to a wider audience of people who just like theatre, but more specifically to people like us who love musical theatre. Because every song in the show is brilliant, it tells a story in its own right, but Alexander has absolutely cram-packed it full of references for those people who get them. So there's lots of what might be called Easter eggs or added value if you're a fan of musical theatre. And if you're not a fan of musical theatre, why on earth are you listening to this podcast? So let's assume that you're interested. I hope that you will be. Assuming that you are, let me tell you what we've got lined up here on Musical Talk this week and next. This week, we're going to hear the interview I conducted with Alexander S. Bermange, the writer of I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical, which I recorded at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in 2019. And in that conversation, we discussed the creation of the show and also many of the songs in it and how Alexander came to write them and how they tell the story of people in the world of musical theatre. If you like, it gives you all the background you need to know about the show. And then next week, there'll be a chance to hear a new interview with Alexander S. Bermange about that show, which is being streamed, in which we touch on the development of the show since it's been in Edinburgh, but also things like how do you create a show specifically for virtual reproduction on a streaming website. Because this isn't just a live show which has been recorded and which is being shown, it's actually a specifically recorded version for live streaming. And I'm fascinated to find out what you need to do to make a live show work in a non-live environment like that. So do be sure to join us next week when you can hear the update conversation, following on from the conversation you'll hear in just a few minutes. So let's get the ball rolling. In just a couple of minutes, as I say, you'll hear that interview from 2019 with Alexander when we talk about I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical. But to get you in the mood and to give you an idea of what the show's like, here is the title song, no less, from Alexander's review. I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical. The song, the review, and shortly, the interview. But first, the song.
I dreamed a dream like every young girl has, that I was certain would come true one day, of stardom and success and all that jazz, so I could pay the bills I'd have to pay. But that isn't quite the way things are. No auditions yet worked out for me. I still long to be a superstar and dream of how I'd love my life to be. I wish that my life were like a musical, that I could go waltzing through in style. With each song and dance I'd be less miserable. With each sound of music I'd smile. The good would make good, the bad would get their due, and steam trains would race, and pussies wouldn't poo, and foreigners always would speak English too. For once I'd not fear the routine. My life would be fit for a queen. I wish that my life were like a Broadway show, for then I would always know the score, and I could predict how it was sure to go. If I'd seen the movie before, I'd be as attractive as a girl could be, and recognize bad guys by their minor key. With enemies I'd still be in harmony, and anything urgent would wait till after a big middle eight. I could cast spells, tyrants would adore me, ghosts would write operas for me. I'd get through songs not fearing ever hearing "We'll let you know," with still a verse to go. Like a West End hit, where others had thoughts the same as mine, and all that I said need not make sense one bit, as long as it just about rhymed. The guys would show feelings that they used to hide. I'd still want to sing with corpses by my side. Well, I'd even sing if I myself had died. I'd live without scruples or shame, and say that the writer's to blame. But then, if my life were like a musical, I might be orphaned, treated mean, or trampled on by wildebeests, or sold to be a slave, or green. I might be killed by my own twin, or made into a pie mid-show, or fed to plants, or crucified, or made to sing with Russell Crowe. I might, I know, but even so, I wish that my life were like a musical, where I felt at home in every key. I'd not have to trek to any place at all. Projections would just come to me. I'd get sentimental without cause to fear that boyfriends will puke at every word they hear. My voice would be pleasing to a phantom's ear. I wish that my life were this way, for then if my life were like a musical, I know there would be a whole show about me. With a part I'd be perfect to play.
I'm Alexander Bermange. I am the composer and lyricist of I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical, which is currently running at the Underbelly in Bristow Square as part of the Edinburgh Fringe.
Now, I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical, which I see emblazoned on your chest even as we speak, which is really helpful.
Absolutely. Well, it's quite a long title, so I find that it helps people remember it.
Let's start with that title. That title is a grabbing title, I think, and that's such a clever secret for a show. The show itself is fantastic. We're going to be talking about that in just a minute, but I really like that fact that you've got the hook. I think there's a lot of that skill in your titles of songs and shows anyway, but was it divine inspiration or was it Sweat, Sweat, Sweat?
It was complete accident after Sweat, Sweat, Sweat. I'd had the idea for the show, I'd written it pretty much, and I just didn't have the title. The show is very much about musical theatre performers. It's kind of their confessions in song. It takes you through the journey of a musical theatre performer's career, and that can be explained in the sentences that I've just used. But I found it really hard to come up with a title. And I went through many titles. When I pitched it to the producer who put it on in London, where it started out, I didn't have a title, I had possibilities. And it really just came down to ultimately my not having come up with a title I was happy with. My going down the list of the song titles of all the numbers that were in the show. And I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical stuck out. In truth, it's not a truly accurate representation of what goes on throughout the show. It represents a moment in the show, but it's a title that people seem to respond to. Certainly, it's a song which actually predated the show, and the title had always intrigued people. And so I just felt that, seeing as the song title had intrigued people, maybe the show title would do likewise.
And it absolutely has, hasn't it? You've been doing very well, I think.
Yes, I mean, it was absolutely not a given. I mean, it did very well in London, but certainly we came to Edinburgh with an unknown cast, an unknown entity is what we were. It had never been in Edinburgh before. This company had never produced in Edinburgh before the festival. Our advance was respectable, but nothing to write home about. But certainly since the date of our official opening night, we have sold out every seat.
And, well, you really can't do better than that, I think.
I guess not. I mean, I've had kind of emails of complaint from people who kind of try to get in and been unable to. But I'm delighted, and I'm really delighted for the team, because although I'm the writer of the show, we've got 4 very hard-working performers who are right at the top of their game. We've got a terrific creative team. And so, although I'm the writer of it, it's really the product of many people's hard work and talent.
As all good theatre must be, it is always a collaboration. But let's not underestimate your involvement in this. I mean, first of all, you're playing a piano throughout.
I am.
So you are there.
I am there.
And of course, they are your babies in the sense that they're your songs.
Indeed.
And they are incredibly adept. I mean, should we talk a little bit about... Well, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
You have written many songs, and you've got several CDs out
Yes.
of songs, witty songs, amusing songs, in that sort of what I would call the British cabaret tradition, probably best
Correct.
identified as the Flanders and Swans school.
That's right.
I know it's bigger than that, but you know they're the daddies,
Yes.
I suppose you might say. However, both within the British tradition and across musical theatre tradition everywhere, there's always been, it seems to me, this long history of songs about what it is to be in show business,
Yes.
and songs sending up what it is to be in show business. And actually, you can at least trace that back to Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yes.
But in Utopia Limited, there's a song called "A Tenor Can't Do Himself Justice."
Yes.
And it's all about this self-pitying actor who's a tenor, who finds that everything gets in the way of his being able to sing properly.
Yes.
When my delicate palate as dry as dust is, the tenor can't do himself justice, something like that. And then, of course, we've got Noel Coward, Why Must a Show Go
Absolutely.
On? Don't Put Your Daughter on the Stage, you know.
Indeed.
And then all the way through, I mean,
Yeah.
Flanders and Swan with a song on your ear about the highly acclaimed opera singer who actually can't find her key.
Yes.
She's tone deaf. In fact.
Yes.
So, you know, they're all the way through British cabaret history and musical
Yes.
history. There's No Business Like Show Business also touches on that kind of thing, obviously Berlin
Yes.
and so I suppose my question to you is, why is that so appealing? And then we'll talk specifically about your songs.
I think...
What is it? Why do we, as an audience, people who are not in show business, find that fabulous? Because we do. It's open. It's accessible.
Completely. I think it's because it's something that, notwithstanding the songs that you just mentioned, it's not something that is very often talked about. And one of the things which inspired me to create the show was that about 2 or 3 years ago, A Piece of Mine was performed on a cruise, and I was on board for 2 weeks with the artists, and of an evening we would all dine together, and a lot of passengers would gravitate towards our cast members.
The glamour of show business.
Yes, but they would ply them with all kinds of questions about their daily lives.
Oh, really?
And they seemed genuinely surprised to learn that they weren't chauffeured from their front doors to the stage doors, that when they went on tour, they weren't put up in 5-star hotels around the country. And there was this genuine interest in their lives. I think certainly recently, what with reality television with all of the advantages and disadvantages that's entailed. It's given us a peer behind the curtain in terms of the audition process, in terms of behind the scenes. It's also, if I may say so, a rather staged version of the audition process.
Of course.
But I wanted to try and take a 360-degree look at the life of a contemporary musical theatre performer, because it's also a subject which has not been tackled a great deal recently.
That's true. That is true.
And I think now that the competition is getting ever fiercer, the demands are getting ever greater, the pay is getting ever lower, the fan culture is getting ever more extreme, the advent of social media is making them a lot more accessible.
Which is a two-edged sword, is it not? Yes.
Completely. So the subject fascinated me, and I think in terms of my previous writing, it had largely fallen into two camps. One was writing musicals, and one was writing comedic songs for albums, as you say, or for performers, or for the BBC.
You're very good on the standalone comic song, actually, yes.
I tend to have done a lot of them, partly because that's often what is in demand by, for example, musical theatre artists who are doing their solo albums or solo appearances, and partly because my work for Radio 4 and the World Service has entailed my having to come up with witty ditties about everything from general elections to cup finals to much more besides.
I think, and the word short notice is looming there.
Absolutely,
in the background, yes.
Absolutely. It's made me a deadline writer, if anything has.
But what a skill that is.
I think, well, indeed, but it means that now I kind of need to have a deadline for everything.
Oh, you've trained yourself into
focuses, it. Yes, inadvertently. I think the thing about a deadline, it really focuses my mind. So nowadays, even when people don't give me a deadline, I have to force them to do it, or otherwise I fear it just won't get done. But it just seems like a show such as this would be a great combination of both my comedic songwriting skills and the experience that I had through the musicals of mine that had been put on, because the way I devised the show was quite simply by speaking to the performer friends that I've made through either their being in shows of mine or that I've just got to know through the circles I moved in, and I've said to them, right, what's it really like to do an exhausting dance routine that is over choreographed to the nth degree? What's it really like to work with a diva? What's it really like to do an on-stage kiss with someone you can't stand? And what I produced was an exaggerated version of that for comedic effect, but every single thing in that show has its basis in truth.
Yes, it's not an absurdist show at all, is it? It is absolutely. It's not quite satirical, but it's observational in that sense.
Completely. Yeah. I think everything is just about believable. For example, there is a song in the show called "I Love to Sing," the context of which is that we have the understudy waiting backstage for the celebrity to be ill or die or whatever, so that he gets to go on.
That opportunity.
Absolutely. And then we see what the celebrity is up to, and it's an example of someone who hasn't got the talent and has just been put there for box office. And I love to sing, the person in question loves to sing, but they can't. Their tuning is off, their timing is off, everything is off. And I think it would be rather far-fetched to suggest that there were one person who, unless they were really unspeakably awful, would count all of those flaws amongst their, inverted commas, skill set. Having said that, that song was written from my experience as an accompanist, which is how I started out. And every single thing in that song was done to me as an accompanist. So people were either singing flat or sharp, or they missed a verse, or they repeated a verse, or they just lost it. So in that sense, every individual nugget, every characteristic has its roots in truth, but I think the accumulation of all of these different ones is what gives it its comedic effect, because although each of those elements is hopefully believable, it's a slightly exaggerated version of the believable to suggest that each of those elements could be combined in one person.
However, it's interesting because it's very good of you to credit your sort of wider group of friends and contemporaries of giving you some examples. But actually, you have come up with many of the ideas and then said, what must it be like to kiss someone you don't like?
Yes.
Actually, it's not simply you've been panning for gold amongst your friends. You've been panning for gold based on an idea that you've had. So,
completely.
So that's quite interesting to me. So you from your own observations and and presumably in some cases not from life, but just imagining what that must be like.
Yes.
You've had to define in many cases what it is you want to, what concept is behind it.
Completely.
Yeah.
I think that's come about through my own curiosity, really. I mean, just as the passengers on the cruise that I described were curious in the lives of performers, I was curious. I mean, I know what it's like to watch an exhausting looking dance routine from the perspective of an audience member. I know what it's like, sitting behind a piano and watching them do it over and over again in rehearsals. But what it feels like,
yes.
I didn't know. And in terms of the other embarrassing things that have happened, that was a lovely thing that I wanted to mine for in all of these examples, be it the dance routine or the kiss or whatever, just trying to dig for those truthful moments. What has happened to you in a dance routine, so that all these things do have their basis in things that have happened. And it's just my curiosity as much as anything. I sat down and I thought, okay, what would I like to know about the lives of musical theatre performers? Because I'm in the business, and we want the show to appeal to people in the business, but we also want it to appeal to lay people as well. So we don't want it to be full of in-jokes. It's very consciously not a parody. There are a lot of Easter eggs, as you will doubtless have noticed, for the discerning musical theatre aficionado, but we've deliberately constructed it in a way that nothing is designed to go over the heads of anyone who's not well versed in musicals. They'll just appreciate it, hopefully, on a different level.
Well, I bought a friend of mine who likes musicals at the basic level, and
right.
he won't mind me saying that, but he
of
goes to
course.
theatre, he loves them, and then goes away again and goes back to accounting or
Yes.
the exciting things in his life. So he's not sort of as married to it as many of us are.
Yes.
And so, exactly as you say, I was enjoying it. There's a very brief reference to, as you say, other songs, bits and pieces. I mean, the old piano roll blues, which isn't even that well-known song because it's a cut song from Follies, isn't it? So, that was a lovely little flavour that came my way. It's like a raspberry ripple. There's just something extra in there.
Well, there are lots of nuggets. I'm a great believer when writing comedic material, and 90% of the show is comedic, in the music contributing to the humour as much as the lyrics, and also providing something whereby repeat listens and repeat views also prove rewarding.
Yes.
And we've been delighted by the number of people who've been in multiple times, even though they might have only a few nights in Edinburgh. We've had people who've been in more than once, just because they've sensed that there was something going on with some of the songs. So, for example, the opening number is called The Opening Number. It's all about what it's like for performers to do an opening number. It is an entirely original song, but the discerning audience member will pick up on the fact that virtually every line of music is a line from a different opening number of a different musical.
Yes, it's a Neapolitan ice cream in that sense, isn't it?
Yeah, lovely way of describing it.
I've
yes.
got ice cream on the head.
That's
on
great.
the
I'm
mind
a great
today,
foodie, so go right ahead. And similar with A Step Too Far, which is the song about dance routines. Just because it's fun and playful, it rewards those who are in the know, but also it just helps give the feel. It gives the opening number the real feel of an opening number. It gives A Step Too Far the real feel of a dance routine.
An overdone one, yes.
Absolutely. So that was
that's
very
exactly
conscious.
what my friend, who, as I say, isn't that into it, he loved the show too.
Yes.
But he was probably connecting to some elements, and
Of
I was
course.
connecting to other elements.
Absolutely.
And I suspect that would be true of almost every audience member. If you sat down and chatted to them, they would all have different bits that they like best, just because of their own thresholds of musical theatre love, shall we say?
Completely. And what we try to do is create something that is the combination of all these different elements: the lyrics, the music, which are hopefully working on their different levels for different audience members, the staging, of which there's much to enjoy, even though it's a relatively small space and there are only four performers. But I think Chris Whittaker, our director choreographer, has done a tremendous job of making it visually exciting. And our four artists are, part of the reason why a lot of the musical Easter eggs might not be picked up is there's quite simply so much to enjoy and admire in the performances. We were blessed to find four performers who are right at the top of their game. They've all been in numerous West End productions. They totally get the material. We're very, very lucky, and so just watching them, regardless of the material they're performing, I think is just a great thing in itself.
Well, you said a very interesting adjective a second or two ago. You said playful.
Yes.
I don't think that can be understated. It's playful, and that is also lovely. That's very engaging. If it was sparky and edgy, or satirical in that slightly bitter sense that satire can sometimes be,
indeed,
I think it would be one of those shows that you might appreciate, but not necessarily love or engage with or enjoy in the same way, because it's playful. You know, sometimes the actors and actresses are being asked to send themselves up or send a character up.
Indeed.
So there's a lot of sort of, you know, darling kind of 30 years in the business stuff here and there. But also, when one of them isn't, you know, they're not all singing all the time. Some of them are on the stage on stools waiting for the next song or watching the performance. What's lovely is that you can see that even though they must know the material backwards by now, they seem to be enjoying the performance too. That's lovely. I watch the other cast members smiling and laughing at what's going on stage. And as an audience, we respond to that so warmly.
I must admit, we do have a cast with one or two corpses amongst them, as we say. But it is lovely that they continue to enjoy the material and enjoy each other's performances. And we've kind of given up asking them to try not to laugh. I mean, hopefully it's not too obtrusive, but I think it's just that thing whereby it is the environment. It's the adjective we both use is playful. There's something that I've tried to make very affectionate about it.
That's a good
word. It's because on one level, a lot of the show could be seen almost like a litany of grievances about the business, and you know, about how people are pigeonholed into being musical theatre performers, not able to become serious actors, about how awful doing an audition is, about how debilitating dance routines are. But ultimately, I do hope that people will see it, and they do appear to have, by and large, as my love letter to musical theatre.
I mean, that's what it feels like, yes.
That's what it's intended to be, and it's just that. The industry, like many, is ruthless, it's hard,
it's a business.
It's exhausting, it's competitive, you get stabbed in the back, you get overlooked. I could go on forever, but
it's not
ultimately,
a meritocracy in that sense,
indeed, absolutely. But the show ends, the final song, or shall we say the song that audiences are led to believe is the final song, is a moment of sincerity that actually addresses why, despite all of that, the performers do it. Why, despite the auditions, despite the dance routines, despite the backstabbing, despite all of that, they still want to continue with this line of work. And again, that was a song called Magic's Making Me. It's not a comedic song.
No.
It's a song where we just get these four beautiful voices to blend to best effect. And again, it was a song that was truly drawn from my conversations with my musical theatre performers and saying to them, look, this is a hard industry, it's a harsh industry. What makes you still go through it? And we explored those moments of magic that answer that question. And that was very important, that we ended the evening on that note, and that it never got to the level of bitterness or rancor or nastiness. All of these downsides were presented in a playful, affectionate, comedic way. But ultimately, there's this thing inside performers that just makes it worth all of the battles and all of the challenges that they've faced along the way during the course of their careers.
So the things we've been getting out of this are love letters, affection, playfulness, and that all of those and the family of positivity that they're connected to in emotional terms,
yes,
are very much the underpin for the piece as a whole, I think, which completely is why it's so successful. But there are some technical songs which I enjoyed in their own right, and the other half of my brain was marvelling at, both in the writing of and in the performance of.
Yes.
One I'm particularly thinking of, I think one of your performances is called Felix Mars.
Yes.
Very striking, very excellent performer.
Yes.
And he has a song where you continually change the key.
That's correct.
But you don't even do that, so it goes up several keys,
yes,
which you can hear the kind of sort of tippy-toe singing,
yes,
I call it, when you're straining. But also, there's at least one verse of it where I think one of the notes is missing, so he has to miss singing a note as well as doing it a different key. That was both a tour de force for him, tour de force for you as a writer, and an absolute joy to listen to, whilst at the same time going, oh my goodness, that looks incredible. How the hell did he do that?
Yes.
That is an amazing song, actually.
Oh, well,
and he deserved a good sit down after that.
Yes, I think a lot of the time, it's something that I do realise, and it's not something I go about deliberately, but my songs are not easy to learn, and they're not easy to sing.
But the rewards are worth it.
Why not? I'm pleased to hear that. I mean, they have brought many a performer to moments of exasperation, and they do require continual concentration, because I'm not a verse, chorus, bridge, chorus.
It's not ABA, is it?
No, and with no disrespect at all intended to writers who do that, because that is a skill. It's just not the way that my brain works and my fingers work. But yes, I do like setting myself these challenges, and I think also getting the music to befit what the song is about. And it was just that song was inspired by the fact that I was doing a series of workshops in a school, and one of the music teachers was saying that there was this room which is really dedicated to instruments that are broken. And so I was there, I was basically teaching kids how to write mini musicals, and there was a musical director there, and the musical director said, oh, it sounds like an instrument graveyard. And there was something about the image of an instrument graveyard that suddenly made me think of all the dodgy pianos I've had to play with keys that are either stuck to the adjacent one or not sounding, or sounding too low. And I thought that would be a really exciting song to try and tackle, or rather an idea to tackle in a song, because what I then gave myself the challenge of doing, well, what's the obvious thing if you try and play something and there's a note that for whatever reason isn't working, you play it in another key, which for an adept pianist is no great deal, but if you're accompanying, that is a great deal for a singer, because obviously it makes it higher and higher, or indeed
out of
lower
their range
and lower.
Eventually, yes,
absolutely. And so putting that within a performance situation, because the context we have for that number is that it's a performance showcase, so it's a big deal, and just that level of exasperation and communication between performer and accompanist just seemed like a really exciting, dramatic opportunity. And so although it's a really hard sing, and actually the deceptively difficult thing about that number is actually remembering what order the different things go in, because it starts with the key that's too loud, so you have to change the key, then it's the key that's sticking to the adjacent key, so you have to change the key, and so on and so forth. And it's just getting that order right. But I think certainly it's a song that the audiences seem to respond to. They seem to get, even if they're not musically literate, because I think everyone knows what it's like to listen to a dud piano, basically.
Oh, yeah. I mean, all the way back from school hymns.
Of course,
yeah.
Of course.
Funny enough, just this is a sidestep, I once saw, it was an amateur production of The Mikado.
Right.
Very well-meaning, quite young students,
yes,
sort of early teens. The entire score hammered out on this ancient piano, church piano, so it was no orchestra, just
yes,
poor woman on a piano. And several of the keys of this piano just did not work, and so it was like The Mikado by Benjamin Britten. It was
yes,
not as an enjoyable experience as I've often found it to be.
I can imagine. I think also that was inspired by the fact that I was once involved with a piece of mine that was on tour, and the piano had been tuned to one semitone out, every key consistently one semitone out. So in order to, well, it did a little bit, because then in order to get it comfortable for the singer who I was accompanying in the show, I then had to transpose the entire score. So yeah, these things happen. Once again, it's based on real life, but it's just about believable. I think.
There's also that slightly teasing feel in one or two of those songs, isn't there? About it is what's called lovey-dom, that's slightly,
completely.
But it is actually human vanity. It's not. You don't just get it in the acting profession.
Correct.
You get it everywhere.
Correct.
A slight preciousness, and there's a wonderful song where the actor has struggled onto stage because of his duty and responsibility to his audience to sing. But of course, at the end, the revelation is that actually it's making sure he gets his applause. He's not going to miss the opportunity of appreciation for anything, even on his deathbed, as it were.
That is the thing, and I know...
Good performance song, that one.
Yes, I mean, one generalises when discussing actors in connection with the inspirations for these songs, but I have been struck by the number of auditions I've conducted or performances I've been to of, I mean, you can't really do it in musicals, but in cabarets you can get away with it, where the audition or the performance or whatever has been prefaced by this lengthy explanation of all the reasons why it won't be as good as it
would
could
normally be. Yes, quite.
Every possible kind of illness. I mean, when we've auditioned this show in the past, it's happened on
you've actually had it in
numerous
real life,
occasions. Oh, absolutely, and it's been hilarious because this is a show, and we know that this is one of the numbers in the show. But yes, I think it's not just actors, but it is always amusing that you hear every possible illness, every possible thing that's gone wrong, every possible excuse. But then what never fails to happen is they totally knock it out of the park.
Dr. Theatre.
Completely. It's as though it's their insurance policy, or whether it kind of helps them feel better. I don't know what it is, but I've never heard someone give that long drawn-out explanation of all the reasons why a performance isn't going to be any good, without them then giving a performance that is stunning.
Pretty impressive, yeah.
Yes.
But as I say, it's teasing that song rather than...
Oh, completely.
It's much playful and loving and affectionate.
I think that they are teasing, because I think with a lot of the songs, I love a good twist at the end of a song, and it's kind of the double challenge of creating a song such as the ones in this show, because they are comedic, but they're also quite expansive in that these aren't 2-minute witty ditties. They're, some of them are good 4 or 5 minutes long.
They're almost chanson
and
in
it's
some senses, aren't
indeed,
they? Yeah.
and it's sustaining the comedic effect and the interest, and constantly coming out with new directions and new things to be funny and that add to our understanding of the character and the situation, but also make sure that there's a sense of progression, that ultimately they are working towards something, that they don't just fizzle out. And I think indeed, I think that pretty much every song in this has an end that is in every way either unexpected or hopefully taking the comedy to a higher level than it's been during the song even, or just something so that the playfulness continues right to the very end, and when you think you've got it and when you think there's nothing more to be surprised at, you get one further reveal that changes everything.
It's that Cole Porter thing. Cole Porter, you probably know this, but Cole Porter always used to say that you need 2 good ideas for a song: the idea of what the song's about and the ending.
Yep.
And he would sometimes come up with the ending first, and then work the song backwards to get to that punchline, payoff, whatever you want to call it.
The ending is incredibly important. It's like writing a limerick, and Cole Porter is a great reference point, because he was a sublime lyricist, also a playful lyricist, to go back to one of our words.
He's one of the wittiest 20th century lyricists,
Completely.
I'd say, yes.
And also a supremely brilliant composer. And there aren't that many of those around who've tackled both music and lyrics. And there are a number like Cole Porter, and also many contemporary writers who I've really been inspired by. And I marvel at their skill to be able to achieve a level of craft whereby you wouldn't say they're a composer who writes lyrics or they're a lyricist who writes music. They actually do both.
They're a songwriter, in fact. Yes.
Indeed, totally.
Well, actually, that takes me quite interestingly, I think, for me, because you've had an extensive career, well before the show and well after the show,
Sure.
I have no doubt.
All going well.
I'd like to I've got two questions, and
Go
I don't know
for
which
it.
one to ask you first.
Okay.
I think following on from Cole Porter, the first question I'm going to ask you is,
Yes.
who would you identify then as your principal influences? Which is not to say that there isn't an Alexander Sound.
Sure, I understand.
But we've all got people we love in the background, and because Cole Porter is one of mine in the sense that
Yes.
I marvel in his lyrical fluency.
Yes.
As does Stephen Sondheim, by the way.
Yes,
there's a famous
of course.
story about Stephen Sondheim when he was writing Together from Gypsy.
Yes.
He went round to see Cole Porter and sang him the lyrics. And
Yes.
he still is proud to boast that Cole Porter didn't see the third comic triplet in one of the rhyme schemes.
Yes.
And that, so he sort of, in his head, he out-Portered Porter.
Yes, indeed. I think I certainly have influences. My taste is very broad in any case, so it's difficult to pinpoint one or even a few. Certainly my early influences were the works of Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber. Those were the shows that my parents took me to see, the mega musicals, the very commercial ones, the ones that most people have as their introduction to musical theatre. And then I suppose that the offshoots of those, such the Bublin and Schoenberg, who I discovered then, and then the Sondheims, and basically the other contemporary musical theatre writers. So I was kind of gradually during my teens.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, as I was going through my teens, what started with Tim and Andrew, and then Bublin and Schoenberg, and then Sondheim, and then gradually, in addition to listening to everything from pop and rock to classical, I was broadening my appreciation. Although I think certainly for my early work, it was still very much the Andrew Lloyd Webber type sound that was influencing it. And then when I was at university, I happened to hear a program on the radio about Tom Lehrer, the great American satirist and writer of short comedic songs like Poisoning Pigeons in the Park, or he put the elements of the periodic table to the tune of Modern Major General. And that was really an eye-opening moment for me, or shall I say an ear-opening moment, in that up until then I'd written the odd comedic song in the musicals that I'd been writing at school and university, but I wasn't aware of the breadth and the scope and the potency of the comedic song.
What you can do with them.
As a number in its own right, and the way in which you can create sometimes even a 90-second number that's full of laughs and have a great twist and have told the story during it. And so I started listening to a lot more material like that. And then through the musicals that I was writing, what was interesting that my early musicals seemed to still be rather dark and serious, and my comedic outlet was really through apart from the odd comic number in the shows, my comedic outlet was largely through my radio work or through the standalone songs I was writing for performers. And about 10 years ago or so, an album of my songs was released called Act One, where a lot of the great and the good of the West End performed different songs from my shows. And there was a review of it that appeared in a German language musical theatre magazine. I've had a lot of shows on in Germany, so there was this interest in my work there. And it was a rave review, and it said something at the end. It summarised the musical voice on the album by saying, you will love this album if you're a fan of Andrew Lloyd Webber, Alan Menken, and Frank Wildhorn. And I took that as a great compliment, but it also made me think, okay, why don't I now just try to expand my horizons to just see what other colours there are to bring to my palette. Not arbitrarily, but if there is a good reason to give my next show another kind of musical language, so much the better. And absolutely. And so since then, not for the sake of it, but I've allowed many, many more influences to creep into my writing, so that each show, while hopefully still having my musical imprint, has its own influences in terms of location or time, so that there's more of a differentiation between the languages of my different shows. And now my influences are really very, very diverse. I mean, I suppose I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical is really a combination of, all the musical theatre composers and lyricists who I admire and whose influences are quite deliberately in many of the songs, plus the Tom Lehrer style comedic songs for the kind of hopefully the wittiness, dare I say.
I grant you that.
Okay,
Absolutely.
Thank you for that.
It teams with wit.
But also, I think in terms of the structure of the songs and also the humour, they probably bear the mark of the writer I would normally cite as being my favourite writer, and it's a name that normally surprises people, and then they think about it and they say, "Oh, okay, I can understand now where you're coming from." And that's a writer named Jim Steinman. Now, Jim Steinman is best known for writing most of Meat Loaf's biggest hits.
Yes.
He wrote all of the albums on Bat Out of Hell, all of the tracks on Bat Out of Hell, all the tracks on Bat Out of Hell 2. He wrote many other standalone songs, such as It's All Coming Back to Me Now for Celine Dion, Holding Out for a Hero, and Total Eclipse of the Heart for Bonnie Tyler, and many, many, many others besides. And what I love about his writing, in addition to the fact that just the style really speaks to me, and the imagery and the subtle blend of humour and sentiment, is that structurally they are incredibly elaborate. Although they're very commercial, they've sold bucket loads. I have no idea how many number ones he's had, but
they're
many.
not simplistic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They take you on a journey. It's not, going back to AB songs. They go through virtually all of the letters of the alphabet, and they absolutely take you on a journey that's very character driven and that's very narrative driven. And although there aren't really any songs in I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical that you can imagine Meat Loaf or Bonnie Tyler singing,
Not that easily, no.
Structurally, I owe a huge debt to him, because I just think that his songs are like mini musicals in themselves, and that's something that's been said about my songs as well.
It's that storytelling ability, in fact.
Absolutely. The ability to tell a story and to fully explore a character from all three dimensions within that 4-minute, 5-minute time frame. Because the other thing about this particular show is it's not necessarily 4 characters that we're following. It's 4 performers, but it can be any number of characters.
Because they're playing different kinds of people at different times.
Exactly.
Yes. And in different combinations.
Indeed, and that's why it's all the more important that within each number you present everything that you want to present about that single character, because you may not meet them again.
Each song has to be self-contained in its own context.
Correct.
Yes, absolutely. You can't take anything for granted as you go in, because it's not the same character going into the song.
Absolutely.
That's a really interesting observation, and one I hadn't actually had a chance to think about. I like that a great deal, and we'll have a chew later.
Yes, very good.
Thank you for that. I think that's been an unexpected journey through your influences,
right,
to a degree, because I was expecting... Tom Lehrer is not a particular surprise.
Yes.
I was expecting that kind of sort of a cabaret end of the market. I think of him as cabaret. I think of him...
Completely.
I think Flanders and Swan and Tom Lehrer, although they're doing different things with different actions, they are semi-contemporaries, and they are at least on the same page, I always think.
Completely.
I think there's a slightly gentler tone to Flanders and Swan, and I think there's a slightly edgier tone to Tom Lehrer.
Indeed.
But I think they're both fully aware of the absurdities of life and know fully how to twist that in an interesting way that we recognise and tells you something, lifts the lid. Although, as my Flanders and Swan say, their job is to put the veneer back on after satire is finished.
Indeed.
The other area, this is the second question I wanted to ask you, is that obviously you've had a long career in writing musicals, but you've had a long career in writing musicals for the radio. Both individual songs, but actual musicals for radio. And that seems to me to be quite an interesting constraint on writing musicals because we think of them as being staged. There's a visual element usually, and that just isn't there obviously for the radio. And yet it's also an amazing throwback. You may very well know this, but in the 1930s on the BBC, there was a great radio producer called Eric Mashvitz, I think, who wrote the lyrics for A Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square,
Right.
and is a great British songwriter.
Yes.
But he composed and produced musicals
Yes.
in the 1930s for the radio.
Yes.
And that's something that seems to me has very sadly completely died out, except for you, Alex.
Yes.
But is it difficult? What frame of mind do you have to be in to write those?
I think, well, in truth, the work of mine on the radio has largely been confined to the comedic song rather than a full-length show. But I think, again, it's a question of being able to produce something that will grab the ear of the listener. And the time constraints there are often very restrictive, so that often you will have 90 seconds to do it. But I think what's been lovely about it for me is that it does introduce one's work to a very, very wide audience, so that
BBC Radio 4 is the most listened to radio station in the country.
Indeed, and the programme from which I've written the greatest number of songs has been our Broadcasting House, which goes out on a Sunday morning, and certainly the later it gets in that programme, the more people tune in because it's just before the Archers. And the lovely thing about that is that's how a lot of people have discovered my work, and I suppose to have that on your credits, I suppose, a lot of people take note of it. So it's been lovely. At the same time, all of the material that I've written for radio, almost without fail, has of necessity had to have quite a limited shelf life.
Yeah.
That's the one downside. I mean, no one would really care for a song about Gordon Brown now, with no disrespect to him,
historic value,
other than
yes,
as a period
as an
piece.
artifact, yes.
Absolutely. But I've always loved radio as a medium. I do wish that there were more full-length musicals done on the radio. I know when I was growing up, it's something that Radio 2 did a lot of, and every so often those great recordings pop up again on Radio 4 Extra. But I think there is something to be learned from that. The fact that they were done, and by all accounts they were popular. I think a lot of it is just now the expense of it.
Yes.
In that, doing a musical on the radio, it requires the resources of your performers, your orchestra, the financial resources of getting the rights and crossing all of those bridges. And in this day and age, when you hear about BBC cutbacks, maybe it's something that's not at the top of their agenda. But I think radio is a wonderful medium. It's a very intimate medium.
And you can carry it with you. I know people now watch television on their telephones on the bus and things, but radio and earphones is still where it's at.
I think radio has never been more accessible, largely because of the advent of the smartphone, and now because of the way in which radio stations are making their content available, not just through conventional radio, but
just
through
listening,
catch up through podcasts. Radio's becoming a visual medium as well, through the videos that stations put out, and it's a very, very different medium to the one that I grew up with, when if you wanted to hear something but you weren't available at that time, you had to set up a cassette recorder with a time switch and hope
your aunt to do it.
Exactly. and just content yourself with hearing 45 minutes of it.
Exactly. The number of recordings I got from that period, actually because I was asking relatives to do it, I missed the first few minutes, or I turned it off before the end, was that all right? Yes.
I've been there before.
Yes.
And interestingly, I think that the States is waking up to this, maybe not through radio, although for all I know they might well be, but in their televised productions of musicals that they're now doing on a regular basis.
Which we had a brief flowering of here in Britain for about 3 years, and then it stopped, didn't
Indeed.
we? We had that Sound of Music.
We had the Sound of Music.
Which was actually jolly good, I think.
There was the Victoria Woodpend one with Michael Ball and Imelda Staunton.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, one would like to think that there would be scope for more of those. One would certainly love to think that there may be the scope for some less commercial ones, some newer pieces, dare I say, rather than just the old chestnuts.
Yeah, we got those, didn't we?
That would be lovely, but I think a lot of it is just driven by commercial factors and audience numbers and budgets and so on and so forth, and things which I probably don't have as much of an understanding of as the people who work in the broadcast industry.
And don't make a good comic song either, if I may say. No, they're just depressive. I will just briefly observe, though, when I was a boy, I was listening to things like Stop the Week with Robert Robinson, Start the Week with Richard Baker, and they all invariably had a song in the middle by Dilly Keane and Fascinating IE. That's how I got into Fascinating IE.
Right.
Their BBC songs on, I think it was Start the Week in their case, were released as a BBC vinyl album.
Yes.
And I got a copy of that for Sales Assistant Blues, which I can remember even now was the one I heard on the radio.
Brilliant.
But Sue Casson used to work on Stop the Week, as did Instant Sunshine.
Yes.
So you're in that long line of tradition, of a very British tradition, I think, of great songwriters in that. Well, let's get back to I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical. Presumably you've had people coming up to you now saying, why don't you write a song about X, a song about Y? This is one of those things that you could, should you choose to do so, make an annual thing with almost a rotating or ever-expanding score?
Potentially. I mean, this is actually a condensed version of the original show, so there's certainly no shortage of numbers where these came from. But yes, I think that's happened not just in connection with this show, but pretty much everything else. Whenever anyone knows a writer, they constantly get asked.
I've got an idea.
Absolutely, and I love it when people do that. I mean, a lot of the time they're great ideas that I don't necessarily feel are the best fit for me.
And you've got to respond, haven't you? In the sense of, if it doesn't speak to you, then it's
oh,
not,
completely,
right.
completely. Someone can write a great song or a great show about a certain subject, and someone else can completely mess it up, and that's just because of the way they respond to it. I think with this particular show, actually, that's happened less because we've tried to make the look at the performer's life as multidimensional as possible. But absolutely, this started as a 2-act, 100-minute show. Then it was condensed for the requirements of the London venue that we did it in, and it's been further condensed for our 60-minute slot here in Edinburgh.
The traditional Fringe slot, yes.
Absolutely. But I think there is every possibility that, depending on where it goes next, that we explore the format, because obviously with it being a comedic musical review, to an extent you can take songs out and put songs in. Obviously, there is an arc to it. There is an overriding structure.
Really well,
but yes, it's not something whereby it always has to be this length and this selection of the songs. It can be short up. Indeed.
Now, Alex, I want to ask you 2 questions.
Go for it.
And they're about accessibility. The first is, how can people get to see this fantastic, brilliant 5-star show here in Edinburgh?
We are on at 8:45 every evening at the Underbelly in Bristow Square until the 26th of August.
So you're doing the full run?
Yes, we've been here since the 31st of July, and we're here right through to the 26th of August with no day off.
Good Lord, I believe is the response to that officially.
Absolutely, we are gluttons for punishment.
It's a cracking show, absolutely, and I would strongly recommend it to anyone. But how can people contact you, Alex? Because you've got a website, you're a great creative mind, a great creative outpourer, if I may say.
Oh, bless you.
And people may want to find out what you're doing in other projects, or keep tabs on this project, because it does go elsewhere, doesn't it?
Completely. Well, my website is www.bermange.co.uk, that being my surname, spelled BERMANGE.co.uk. I'm also on Twitter at Bermange. That's at BERMANGE. And I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical in particular also has its own Twitter account, which is quite simply at Like a Musical.
Splendid. Yes, it's a long title for Twitter though, isn't it?
Too long for Twitter, so we've condensed it to the last 3 words, like a musical.
Alex, I must say, it's been a wonder talking to you.
Thank you so much.
You're a man who's got talent pouring out of every finger, it seems to me.
Bless your heart.
The show is cast iron. It's absolutely fantastic. I'd recommend it to be seen by everybody and anybody. And I know your other works are also excellent. And you have CDs out as well if people can't make it to your shows.
Absolutely, yes.
All on the website, I believe.
Indeed, all on the website. And thank you very much indeed on behalf of the entire I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical team, the cast and creatives. As I said earlier, the result is as much a product of the great performances by Felix Moss, who you mentioned, and also our other three performers, James Hume, Charlotte O'Rourke and Charlotte Steen, also through the great direction and choreography of Chris Whitaker, and our associate director Damien Sandys, and my co-arranger Jerome Vandenberg. It's really the combination of all of these great people's formidable talents, and it's on behalf of them that I thank you for your enthusiasm for the show.
It's a positive galaxy of stars, by the way.
Absolutely, and we're all just delighted by the way it's taken off.
Alex, I look forward to talking to you again, I hope.
Absolutely, likewise. Thanks ever so much.
Musical talk. And there we are. That was the wonderful Alexander S. Bermange, a truly talented man and a very friendly man. It was lovely talking to him, in conversation with me, recorded at the Gilded Balloon Teviot in 2019. And I hope that gave you an insight into why I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical is such a wonderful show. Certainly, as I've said, it got 5 stars from Musical Talk and, more or less, 5 stars from everybody else who ever went to see it in a reviewing capacity. It was a great show. And it's a show I know that every listener of Musical Talk would get something from. So, as I said at the beginning, there is a chance to do that, and that is the best news I've heard this week. So how can one do that? Well, the best thing to do is go to the website of the King's Head Theatre. That's the King's Head Theatre in Islington. We've discussed it on many occasions here on Musical Talk. But if you want to find their website, it's kingsheadtheatre.com. And in their What's On list, you will find I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical, subtitled The Highs and Lows of a Life Spent Treading the Boards. And there you can book tickets for the virtual production, which will be made available to watch at any time between the 22nd of April and the 12th of May. And the cast for this is not the Edinburgh cast, it's a special cast purely for this King's Head video production. It's Luke Bayer, Charlotte O'Rourke, Lucas Rush and Charlotte Ann Steen. All 4 of them well-known West End regulars. And just briefly to get you excited even more, here's one line from the description. From voice-straining high notes to limb-spraining high kicks, via onstage smooches and offstage feuds, this laugh-out-loud caper takes in the journey from wide-eyed drama school graduate to difficult diva or past-it chorus member. So, do go along to the King's Head Theatre website. As I say, kingsheadtheatre.com. And you can also go to Alexander's own website, and that is bermange.co.uk. Bermange. And don't forget, next week there's a chance to hear a new conversation with Alexander as we talk about this new virtual production. I can't wait, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So, for the time being, thank you very much for listening to this episode of Musical Talk. I hope it's brought you a little moment of joy in an otherwise sad week, and I hope that it's also whetted your appetite for an absolutely fantastic show, which you could have seen at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe 2 years ago, and even if you didn't, you can see at the end of April. A prospect of delight for us all. So, until next week, let me say goodbye. And I'm going to do it now. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2021. Except for the song, where the copyright remains with Alexander S. Bermange. And my enormous thanks go to Alexander for allowing me to play his wonderful song in this episode. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at Musical Talk Thos. Truly quiet environment in Edinburgh. It's all very much on the hoof, isn't it?
Yeah, whoops, on top of my hand. I feel naked without in my hand. You know, I'm not like...
Well, I know the feeling.
Oh, absolutely.
Civil servant at trade, you say. So
Oh, really? Oh, excellent.
I can't help it. Hence the organised, it's a military-style plan.
No, you're not the only one, actually. Some people have kind of got out. I think you've kind of got to do it like that, really.
If you want to maximise the time, and who doesn't? What's the point? It's an expensive environment. Let's do it properly, I always think.